Well, the opposition leader in Solomon Islands, Matthew Wiley, has made some pretty acidic observations about Australia's response. Now, he's told the ABC that he went and spoke to Australia's High Commissioner in Honiara back in August last year. And while nothing was certainly written down at that point and negotiations were, by the sounds of it, in very informal or nascent stage, he'd already got wind of it, and he said that he actually warned the Australian High Commissioner, Dr Lachlan Strachan, about these negotiations because he was so worried about the implications of the security agreement that was apparently now being eyed by both China and Solomon Islands. Now, Matthew Wiley complains that after that he saw no evidence that Australia did anything to try and head it off. The Australian government denies that. It says that it's been fully apprised of what's going on, and it's saying, at least on background, that it has been making continual representations to Solomon Islands, expressing Australia's concerns about what is being proposed here. But in Matthew Wiley's view, at least, not enough has been done by Australia. And honestly, it's difficult as an independent observer without a very clear idea of what has or hasn't happened behind the scenes to really make a judgment about whether Australia has done enough one way or the other to head it off. Either way, it seems very much a live prospect at the moment. The government of Solomon Islands seems determined to press ahead with this, although we are waiting to hear more from PM Manasseh Sogavare, who's going to address Parliament tomorrow on the latest of what he calls a security treaty between China and Solomon Islands. And that is, I think you can say, an address that will be followed very closely, not just in Honiara, but in Canberra, in Wellington and in Washington as well.
And Stephen, are we any the wiser as what we might expect from that announcement tomorrow?
What we don't know at this stage is whether the document that was leaked late last week bears much of a resemblance to what's currently being negotiated. There has been some speculation that what we saw last week might have been something of an ambit claim by China, and that the final version, whenever we do actually get to see that, if it is in fact agreed, might be slightly watered down. But we simply don't know yet because we haven't seen the final text. We don't even know exactly where security negotiations between the two countries are up to at the moment. Now, last week, the government of Solomon Islands did point out a statement basically defending the arrangement, saying it was necessary to diversify Solomon Islands' security relationships beyond Australia and New Zealand and to reach out to new parties. It also said at that point that there was an economic imperative there, that there was a development angle to what was being proposed, although it was difficult to see much of that in the text of what was leaked. So again, it will be fascinating to see exactly what the Prime Minister says tomorrow, whether he reveals exactly what is in the current draft, where the negotiations are up to, whether some of those provisions that are so broad and opaque, which worried people in Australia so much about potentially replenishing PLA and vessels in Solomon Islands, those provisions about potentially allowing Chinese troops into Solomon Islands to guard Chinese assets and personnel and nationals, whether that language is still going to stick in the treaty or the agreement as it's negotiated. It'll be very interesting to see what the Prime Minister has to say about that tomorrow.
Yeah, and even if there is a difference over whether Matthew Wiley warned Canberra, is there still a sense that the Australian government has dropped the ball a little in terms of nurturing this relationship?
Well, look, the critics of the government say that the proof is in the pudding. In the end, you know, the government has not managed to head off this agreement, an agreement with one of our closest security partners in terms of countries in the region where Australia basically has a monopoly with the help of some close Pacific partners on public security. The argument made by critics is that, look, the government can complain all it likes about the difficulties it's facing and the relentlessness of China's approach. It can complain all it like about constituency development funds or elite capture or whatever you want to say, but in the end it had an obligation to try and stop this sort of thing happening because Solomon Islands is so geographically close to Australia, because historically we have been by far the most important security partner that Solomon Islands has, and because it has such difficult security implications and strategic implications for Australia. The government might argue against that it's pushing up against a very, very difficult, you know, set of circumstances, a government that seems determined to reach beyond Australia, a very deep-pocketed opposition in China, and a broader geopolitical climate which is very much in flux. But critics aren't taking that too seriously. They say in the end it's up to the government to, if not sink this agreement, then at the very least try and neuter it, or at the very least water down some of those elements that are so troubling to Australia.
Yeah, good to talk, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Beverly. Appreciate it.